Not yet.
Hey, mop man, come here.
No.
You want to show us something, old man? Or just keep mopping? Whenever you're ready.
The enviable belt. It's a little after midnight, and the man with the mop thinks he's alone. The gym is dark. One row of fluorescent lights buzzes near the ceiling, the kind that flickers before it dies. The floor is already clean. He mopped it an hour ago. But he's still standing there, in the middle of the mat, in his gray janitor's shirt, and he's not holding the mop anymore. He sets it against the wall, careful, quiet, and then he starts to move. Not the way a tired man moves at the end of a long shift. He moves like water finding its way downhill. His bare feet barely touch the floor. His hands cut through the empty air without a sound. In the big mirror on the wall, his reflection turns and steps and strikes, and his eyes, pale blue and completely still, are locked on something that isn't there. Something only he can see. He is 44 years old. He cleans this building for $11.40 an hour, and every person who trains here would swear on their life that this man has never thrown a punch in his life. They are about to find out how wrong they are. Because in 6 weeks, a young black belt is going to stand in the center of this same mat, in front of 30 people and 20 cell phone cameras, and he is going to dare this janitor to fight him. As a joke, for content. And what happens next is going to end up on every screen in the country. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Stay with me. Because to understand why a grown man would hide what he is, you have to understand what it cost him to learn it. And you're not going to believe what walks through that door at the end. Let's go back to the beginning. Sterling Martial Arts Academy sat at the end of a strip mall in a quiet suburb outside Denver, Colorado. From the parking lot, it looked like money, polished glass doors, a window full of trophies, championship banners hanging from the ceiling inside, every single one of them carrying the same name in gold letters. Frank Whitaker. Frank had built the place from nothing. 6-time national champion. The kind of man other instructors drove across 3 states to train with. His academy didn't turn out hobbyists, it turned out champions. Parents paid $400 a month and drove 40 minutes each way to get their kids on that mat, and the parking lot was always full of SUVs and Sens that cost more than most houses. And every night after the last student left and the last SUV pulled away, one man stayed behind. His name was Ethan Callahan. Ethan arrived every evening at 6, right as the advanced class was wrapping up. Gray polo shirt, black work pants, steel-toed boots, a mop bucket with one wheel that squeaked no matter how much oil he put on it. He wiped down the mirrors, emptied the trash, restocked the towels, scrubbed the mats, and locked the doors at midnight. And nobody talked to him, nobody asked his name. To the students of Sterling Academy, Ethan Callahan was furniture, a shadow that mopped. Half of every paycheck went to a place called Rosewood Gardens, a care facility over in Lakewood, where his mother lived. She had early-onset dementia. Some weeks Ethan ate rice and canned beans for 6 days straight so the payment wouldn't bounce. He never once complained, not to anyone. Here's the thing about Ethan Callahan. He was not what he appeared to be. 9 years in the United States Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and somewhere between forward operating bases and desert nights that never seemed to end, Ethan trained under men who taught him things you don't put on a resume. Green Beret, combatives instructor, a master of close-quarters fighting earned not in a nice, clean dojo but through broken fingers, cracked ribs, and hours in heat that would drop most men where they stood. Ethan never told anybody. He never hung his certificates. He never wore a belt. And the reason he stayed silent was the kind of reason that keeps a man up at night. On his last deployment, he'd stepped in to protect a younger soldier who was being beaten during a hazing that had turned vicious. Ethan used what he knew. He used it fast. And when it was over, 2 men were in the hospital, and the whole thing got buried in a sealed file to protect the soldier who'd been attacked. Ethan walked away with clean hands and a wound nobody could see. He carried the memory of how quickly those hands could end something, and the fear, the real fear, that one day he might not be able to stop. So he chose the mop, he chose the quiet, he chose to be invisible. Because a man who is invisible can't hurt anybody. And then there was Brett Hollis. 26 years old, second-degree black belt, 6'1", 200 pounds of protein shakes and self-regard. His father, Richard Hollis, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships stretched all across Colorado, and Richard's donations were the reason Sterling Academy had new mats, new equipment, and a renovated locker room with a brass plaque on the wall that read, "Made possible by the Hollis family." Brett knew this. Everybody knew this. He walked through that academy like he owned it, and in a way that mattered, he almost did. He trained 5 days a week. He won at regional tournaments often enough to believe he was untouchable. But underneath all that confidence was something cracked. His father called him soft. "You've got every advantage I never had," Richard told him once, over dinner, in that flat voice that cut deeper than yelling ever could. "And you're still not the best. Explain that to me." That sentence lived in Brett's chest like a splinter he couldn't dig out. So Brett did what people like Brett always do. He went looking for someone to feel bigger than, someone who couldn't fight back. He found Ethan. It started on a Tuesday. Brett was running the advanced sparring class, 8 students on the mat. Ethan was down the back hallway, restocking paper towels in the restroom, minding his own business the way he always did. Brett stopped the drill. "Hold on," he said. He walked off the mat, bare feet slapping the hardwood, and stopped at the supply closet where Ethan was kneeling. "Hey, mop man, come here." Ethan stood up slowly. "You need something?" Brett grabbed a sparring helmet off the shelf and shoved it into Ethan's chest. "Put it on. We need a body for drills." "I'm working," Ethan said. "You're working for us." Brett's voice dropped low. "My dad signs your check, so when I say get on the mat, you get on the mat." The whole room went still, 8 students watching. Nobody said a word. Ethan set the helmet down on the shelf. "I'll pass." And he turned around and went back to stacking the towels. Brett stood there for 3 long seconds, his jaw working. Then he grabbed a kicking pad and threw it down the hall. It bounced off Ethan's mop bucket with a crack that echoed off the walls. "Clean that up too," Brett called out, not even looking back. Some of the students laughed, not all of them, but enough. Ethan picked up the kicking pad, leaned it neatly against the wall, and kept working. That night, Brett sat in a bar downtown with 2 of his training buddies, 3 beers deep and loud about it. "You should have seen his face," he said, grinning. "I told him to get on the mat, and he looked like he was gonna cry. Big guy, too. Well, kinda lean, but tall, just soft, no fighting him at all. Zero." He took a long pull of his beer, and for just a second the grin slipped, because somewhere under all that noise he heard his father's voice again. "Soft, you're soft." He shook it off, ordered another round. Across town in a dark and empty training hall, Ethan Callahan stood alone, and his hands were shaking. He looked at the empty mat and he said to himself very quietly, "Not yet." The next week it got worse. Brett started filming him. Not in secret, right out in the open. He'd hold his phone up like a tourist at a zoo and narrate while Ethan mopped. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brett would say, "meet the Academy mascot. Look at that form. Truly elite technique. Somebody get this man a belt, a mop belt." He posted the clip. The caption read, "Our janitor thinks he trains here. 150 likes in an hour." Laughing emojis stacked up in the comments. Ethan saw it that night, sitting on the floor of his apartment, eating cold rice out of a plastic container. He looked at the screen for about 10 seconds. Then he turned the phone face down and finished his dinner. The next day, Ethan opened his supply closet and found it empty. Everything gone: mop heads, disinfectant, trash bags, gloves. He found it all 20 minutes later, stuffed in the dumpster behind the building, soaked in old protein shake, with a note taped to the bag in black marker, "Where your stuff belongs." Ethan pulled it all out, washed what he could, replaced what he couldn't out of his own pocket. $14 he did not have. He didn't report it. Who was he going to report it to? Diane Mercer, the manager, ran the schedule and the books, not the students. And Frank Whitaker, the owner, hadn't set foot in the building in 4 months. He was on the tournament circuit, training fighters in other states. As far as the day-to-day went, the academy belonged to Brett now. At least that's how it felt. Then came the night Ethan almost broke. He was mopping the main hall when Brett came out of the locker room, still in his gi, and walked straight across the wet floor Ethan had just cleaned. Left a footprint on every single tile. "Hist a spot," Brett said without stopping. Ethan's grip tightened on the mop handle. His knuckles went white. His shoulders shifted just slightly into a stance he hadn't used in years. His breathing changed, shorter, controlled, the kind of breathing you learn when your life depends on staying calm. And then he caught himself. He loosened his grip, dropped his shoulders, and went back to mopping. But his body had remembered, and that scared him more than Brett Hollis ever could. Somebody was watching, though. Somebody Brett never noticed. Her name was Nora Bennett, 27, a freelance photographer who'd signed up 3 weeks earlier for self-defense classes. She was quiet, and she paid attention, and she did not like what she was seeing. One afternoon, she watched Brett throw a wet towel at Ethan's face across the room, and she watched Ethan catch it. One hand snapping up out of nowhere, faster than anyone in that room could have moved, and then he lowered it and pretended he'd just reached out for it. Nora's eyes narrowed. That wasn't a normal catch. That was a trained reflex. That was the kind of speed you don't have unless somebody drilled it into you until it stopped being a choice. She didn't say anything, but she started watching a lot more closely. That weekend, out of nothing but curiosity, Brett typed Ethan's name into a search engine. It took 3 clicks. United States Army, 9 years, 2 deployments, honorable discharge. For just a moment, something flickered across Brett's face. Not respect, recognition. The understanding that maybe this wasn't just some guy with a mop. But instead of backing off, Brett leaned in. Monday morning, he announced it to the whole class. Yo, did you guys know our janitor was in the Army? He said it like a punchline. 9 years serving his country and he ends up mopping our floors. That's the American dream right there, folks. A few forced laughs. Nora looked at the ground. I mean, what happened, right? Brett kept going, pacing the mat. You go overseas, you serve, and you come back to scrub toilets. Either the Army broke him, or there wasn't much there to begin with. Ethan was in the hallway. He heard every word. His mop stopped for 3 seconds. Then it started again. That evening, Brett called the senior students together and laid out his plan. Saturday, he said, arms crossed, grinning at himself in the mirror. We do a fun match, staff versus students, and by staff, I mean Ethan. A student named Cody frowned. He's not going to agree to that. He doesn't need to agree, Brett said. He works here. We tell him to show up. He shows up. Bring your phones. This is going to be content. He started a group chat right there. The message read, Saturday, Ethan versus me. Academy mascot gets a promotion. The laughing emojis piled up. That night, Ethan sat in his car in the dark parking lot for 10 minutes. His phone buzzed. Somebody had forwarded him a screenshot of the group chat. He read it twice. Then he set the phone on the passenger seat and closed his eyes. He knew what was coming, and for the first time in years, he didn't look away. Wednesday night, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed and stared at a resignation letter he'd typed on his phone. 2 sentences. Polite, clean, done. His thumb hovered over send. And then the phone rang. Rosewood Gardens, his mother's evening call. Her voice was thin, but it was steady. She asked about his day. He lied and said it was fine. She asked if the people at work treated him well, and he paused just a beat too long. Ethan, she said, you're thinking about running from something. He didn't answer. Baby, you never ran from anything in your life. Not from boot camp. Not from over there. Don't you dare start now. He closed his eyes, and he deleted the letter. Thursday morning, Ethan made 2 moves. First, he found Nora Bennett in the parking lot before class. He'd never spoken to her directly before. He kept his voice low. Saturday, Brett's planning something on the mat. I need someone I trust to record all of it, start to finish. No editing. And Nora looked at him for a long moment. I'll be there. Second, he called an old Army buddy named Marcus Reed, who was now a civil rights attorney downtown. Ethan explained the whole thing in under 2 minutes. Marcus's answer was immediate. Don't throw the first punch. Don't say anything that sounds like a threat. And you call me the second, it's over. Ethan hung up. He didn't plan to fight. He planned to be ready. Saturday, 2 o'clock. The academy was packed. Word had spread through that group chat like gasoline. Every senior student showed up, a few beginners too, even some friends from outside who'd never set foot on a mat in their life. More than 30 people crammed into that training hall, phones out, the energy buzzing like the air before a championship bout. Brett stood in the center of the mat, fresh gi, belt retied twice for the cameras. He was bouncing on his toes, rolling his neck, shadow boxing the air like he was warming up for a title fight. Somebody started a slow chant, Mop man, Mop man, Mop man. Ethan walked in through the back door at 2:15. Work clothes, no gi, no belt, no gloves, just Ethan looking like a man who'd come to fix a leaking pipe. Brett spotted him. There he is, the main event. Laughter rippled through the room. A phone flash went off. Come on, Ethan, get on the mat. Don't be scared. I'll go easy. 60%, maybe 40. I'm just here to set up chairs for the kids' class, Ethan said quietly. Chairs can wait. Brett's grin vanished. His voice went flat. Get on the mat, or do I need to call my dad and have a little conversation about your employment? The room went silent. Everybody understood exactly what that meant. Ethan stood still for 5 seconds. He looked around. 30 faces, 15 cameras, and Nora Bennett in the back corner, phone steady, angle wide, exactly where he'd asked her to be. He stepped onto the mat. The crowd erupted. Brett tossed him a sparring helmet. Ethan caught it with one hand, quick and clean, without even looking. He held it a moment, then set it down on the floor. I don't need this, he said. Brett laughed. Your funeral. They squared up. Brett in a textbook fighting stance, left foot forward, hands high, chin tucked. Ethan just stood there, straight arms at his sides, feet shoulder-width apart. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. Brett didn't waste time. He fired a jab, fast and clean, right at Ethan's chin. Ethan moved his head 2 inches to the left, the fist past his ear. He didn't raise his hands, didn't step back. He just shifted like a tree bending in a breeze. Brett frowned, threw a cross harder. Ethan turned his torso a fraction, and the punch grazed his shoulder and slid past. No. The crowd murmured. Brett reset. Front kick snapping, aimed at Ethan's gut. Ethan pivoted on his back foot, and the kick hit nothing but air. His feet moved so smoothly they barely made a sound on the mat. The murmuring stopped. Something was wrong. The janitor wasn't getting hit. Brett's face changed. The grin was gone. He came in with a 3-punch combo, jab, cross, hook, the kind of combination that won him trophies in 3 counties. Ethan slipped the jab, parried the cross with his forearm, a sharp crack that echoed off the mirrors. And the hook? He simply wasn't there for it. He'd already moved. 1 step. No panic, no rush, no wasted motion. The room was dead quiet now. Even the chanting had died. Brett's breathing got heavy. His footwork got sloppy. Frustration leaked into everything he did. He threw his showpiece, a spinning back kick, the move that opened his highlight reel, the one that always landed in competition. Ethan read it before Brett's body even turned. He stepped inside the rotation so close that Brett's legs sailed harmlessly behind him, and for a split second the two of them were inches apart, face to face. Ethan looked Brett dead in the eyes. And Brett saw something he had no words for. Not anger, not even effort, just calm, complete, total, terrifying calm. The calm of a man who already knows exactly how this ends. Ethan stepped back. He still hadn't thrown a single strike. Fight back, Brett shouted. His voice cracked. Sweat dripped off his chin. Stop running and fight. Ethan said nothing. And Brett charged. A wild overhand right, fueled by 3 weeks of humiliating a man who'd turned out to be something else entirely. Ethan moved like water. He stepped off the line, caught Brett's arm at the wrist and the elbow, redirected all that momentum, and executed one throw. One technique, clean textbook, perfect. Brett's feet left the ground. For 1 frozen second, 200 pounds of black belt was airborne, turning through empty space. Then he hit the mat, flat on his back. The impact went through the whole hall like a thunderclap. The air left his lungs in one ugly gasp. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, chest heaving, mouth open. He did not get up. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. 30 phones kept recording in absolute silence. Ethan stood over him, not gloating, not posing, just standing, breathing easy. He reached down and offered his hand. Brett slapped it away. Ethan nodded once, stepped off the mat, and that's when the front door opened. Frank Whitaker walked in. 63 years old, silver hair cropped short, a worn leather bag over one shoulder. He'd driven 6 hours from a tournament in Kansas City, arriving a full day earlier than anyone expected. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes swept the room, the crowd, the phones, Brett flat on the mat gasping, and Ethan, barefoot at the edge, still in his work clothes. Frank's bag slid off his shoulder and hit the floor with a heavy thud. He looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at him. And then Frank Whitaker, 6-time national champion, the most respected martial artist in the state of Colorado, put his feet together, straightened his back, and bowed. Not a nod, not a casual tilt of the head, a deep, full bow, the kind you give a McCaster, the kind no one in that room had ever seen Frank Whitaker give to anyone. And the whole hall stopped breathing. It's been a long time, Frank said quietly. Sergeant Callahan. 30 phones caught every second of it. And somewhere in the back, a voice whispered, "What the hell is happening?" Nora Bennett uploaded the full video that night. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, every punch Brett threw, every one Ethan slipped, and that bow at the end. She titled it, "Black Belt Dares Janitor to Fight, Then the Sensei Walks In and Bows to Him." By sundown, 200,000 views. By midnight, over 1 million. The comment sections exploded. Ethan Callahan, the man nobody talked to, the shadow that mopped, was suddenly everywhere. Here's what you need to understand. Not everybody who saw that video wanted to celebrate him. By Monday afternoon, Brett Hollis's father had hired a lawyer. Richard Hollis did not waste time. By Tuesday morning, Ethan was served with papers. Assault and battery filed in Jefferson County. The attorney was a man named Preston Vaughn, one of the most expensive litigators in Denver, the kind whose suit cost more than Ethan's car. Ethan read the document 3 times. His hands were steady. His stomach was not. But the lawsuit was only the first blow. Because Richard Hollis hadn't just hired a lawyer, he'd hired a media consultant. A woman named Lauren Pike, whose entire job was to shape a story before it ever reached a courtroom. And she was very, very good at it. By Wednesday, a new clip appeared on every local news channel. 11 seconds long, it showed Ethan executing the throw, Brett airborne, Brett hitting the mat, Brett gasping on the floor. No context, no build-up. None of the 6 minutes of Brett throwing the first punch, the second, the 10th, just a man in work clothes slamming a younger man to the ground. The headline read, "Violent Janitor Attacks Student at Local Academy." A talk radio host called Ethan a ticking time bomb disguised as a cleaning man. And the comment section split in half. The people who'd seen Nora's full video defended Ethan, but millions more had only seen those 11 seconds, and 11 seconds was enough. That man should be in jail. He could have killed that kid. Why was a janitor even on the mat? Ethan stopped reading after the first 100 comments. Then Marcus Reed went to work. He filed to preserve all the security footage from the academy for the past 90 days. He subpoenaed Nora Bennett's full, unedited video. He requested Brett Hollis's complete disciplinary history. And that's when the cracks started to show. The academy had 4 security cameras. Marcus pulled the footage from the 3 weeks before the fight, and the tapes showed everything. Brett throwing the mop, Brett kicking the bucket, Brett shoving the helmet into Ethan's chest. 14 separate incidents of harassment in high definition with timestamps. But it went deeper than that. Diane Mercer, the manager, came forward. She sat across from Marcus in his office, hands folded, and told him about the complaints. 3 written complaints filed against Brett Hollis over the past 2 years, 2 from former students. 1 from a part-time instructor who quit after Brett threatened him during sparring. Every single one had been quietly buried, acknowledged, never acted on. And the reason was obvious once you lined them up. After the first complaint, the academy got new mats. After the second, a renovated locker room. After the third, a redone lobby. Every time a complaint surfaced, a Hollis donation followed. The money didn't just support the academy, it silenced it. Diane slid a folder across the table. Copies of all 3 complaints, and the donation receipts that came right after each one. "I kept everything," she said. "I knew this day was coming." And Marcus looked at her. "Why didn't you speak up before?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I have 2 kids and no savings. Same reason Ethan kept mopping." Marcus filed a counterclaim. Workplace harassment, hostile environment, and defamation for the deliberately edited video. He filed to dismiss the assault charge, citing clear evidence of self-defense. For the first time in 2 weeks, Ethan felt something other than dread. And then Preston Vaughn played his card. It came during the preliminary hearing. Vaughn stood, adjusted his tie, and requested permission to introduce a sealed military record. Ethan's sealed military record. Marcus objected instantly. The judge hesitated. But Vaughn argued relevance. If the defendant had a history of violent confrontation, it spoke to his character. The judge allowed it. Limited scope, but allowed. Vaughn opened the file and read aloud. The defendant was involved in a physical altercation during his final deployment that resulted in the hospitalization of 2 fellow service members. The incident was severe enough to warrant a sealed record. He let it hang in the air. This is not the first time Ethan Callahan has used excessive force, and the last time the United States Army had to bury it. The room shifted. Reporters scribbled. Ethan sat perfectly still, eyes forward. Marcus gripped his pen so hard it nearly snapped. Headlines that night were brutal. Janitor's violent military past exposed. Sealed record reveals pattern of aggression, from hero to hazard. Ethan drove home in silence. He didn't turn on the radio. He walked into his apartment, sat down on the floor, and pressed his back against the wall. Everything he'd buried, every memory, every reason he'd chosen the mop over the mat, it was all public now. And the one thing that could save him was the truth about that sealed file. But the truth needed a witness, and that witness hadn't spoken about it in 8 years. The mediation was held on a Thursday morning, room 4B, Jefferson County Courthouse. Fluorescent lights, a long oak table, no jury, no cameras. Just a court-appointed mediator named Judge Eleanor Hayes, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and zero patience for theatrics. On one side sat Brett Hollis and his father Richard, flanked by Preston Vaughn and a paralegal carrying 2 leather binders. On the other side sat Ethan Callahan in a clean gray shirt and Marcus Reed in a navy suit he'd owned for 12 years with a single manila folder and a laptop. Judge Hayes opened. "This is a mediation, not a trial. But I expect the same honesty, Mr. Vaughn. You may begin." Vaughn stood and went straight for the throat. He put the sealed report up on a screen, key phrases highlighted in yellow. During his final deployment, Mr. Callahan attacked 2 fellow service members with enough force to hospitalize both. The Army sealed this not to protect the victim, but to contain the damage. This is a man who hides what he is. Richard Hollis leaned back, arms folded, a thin smile on his lips. Judge Hayes turned. "Mr. Reed, your response." Marcus didn't stand. He opened his laptop, turned the screen toward the judge, and pressed play. A face appeared. A man in his late 30s in a dress uniform, 3 rows of ribbons on his chest. He spoke directly into the camera, and his voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "My name is Captain Isaiah Turner, United States Army, currently stationed at Fort Carson. In 2016, during our deployment, I was the target of a hazing attack by 2 senior members of my unit. It was physical. It was ugly. And it would have kept going if Ethan Callahan had not stepped in." He paused, swallowed. Ethan used only the force necessary to stop it. He did not start it. He did not escalate beyond what was needed. Those 2 men were hospitalized because of the severity of their own attack, not because Ethan lost control. He looked straight into the lens. The record was to protect my identity, to protect my career, not because Ethan did anything wrong. Ethan Callahan saved my life that night, and I have carried the weight of his silence for 8 years. The video ended. The room was very quiet. Richard Hollis's smile was gone. Marcus closed the laptop and opened the manila folder, and one by one he laid it all out on the table. Nora Bennett's full video. 6 minutes and 40 seconds of Brett throwing every single punch first, with Ethan defending without one offensive strike. 90 days of security footage, 14 documented incidents of harassment. 3 written complaints, all buried, all followed by Hollis donations. Diane Mercer's signed statement. 8 statements from current students who'd watched it happen, including 2 who admitted they'd laughed at the time and were ashamed of it now. Marcus spread the papers across the table like a winning hand. "Mr. Vaughn wants to paint my client as a dangerous man hiding a violent past. The truth is simpler. Ethan Callahan has spent his entire life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He did it in the Army. He did it on that mat. The only thing he ever hid was his own ability, because he was afraid of what men like Brett Hollis would push him to use it for." He looked at Richard. "The Hollis family didn't file this because Brett was injured. Brett wasn't injured. He was embarrassed, and embarrassment is not a crime." Judge Hayes took off her glasses. She turned to Richard Hollis. "Mr. Hollis, I've reviewed the footage, all of it. Your son threw the first strike, multiple strikes. The defendant defended himself with a single controlled technique. I've also reviewed the complaint history and the donation records." She paused. "The pattern here is not violence by Mr. Callahan. The pattern is silence purchased by your family." Vaughn leaned over and whispered something. Richard raised his hand. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to discuss a private settlement, a mutual non-disclosure agreement, and—" "No." Ethan's voice was quiet, but it stopped the whole room. Everybody looked at him. It was the first word he'd spoken the entire hearing. "No settlement," Ethan said. "No NDA. I want it on the record, in public." Marcus put a hand on his arm. Ethan looked at him. Marcus nodded. "My client requests a formal finding," Marcus said. "Dismissal of all charges with prejudice, and a formal note of the harassment evidence for any future proceedings." Judge Hayes looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then she looked at Richard Hollis, whose jaw was locked so tight a vein stood out at his temple. "I'm granting the motion," she said. "All claims against Ethan Callahan are dismissed, with prejudice. The harassment evidence will be preserved and noted. And I'm referring the matter of the edited video to the district attorney for review of potential defamation." She closed her folder. "Mr. Hollis, I'd advise your family to step very carefully from here on out." Richard stood without a word. Brett followed, eyes on the floor. Vaughn packed his binders in silence. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Ethan sat there, hands still folded, breathing easy. Marcus leaned over. You okay? For the first time in weeks, Ethan's eyes were clear. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. The news broke within hours. Every outlet that had run the 11-second clip now ran the correction. Janitor cleared. Full footage reveals self-defense and a pattern of harassment. The talk radio host, who'd called Ethan a ticking time bomb, issued a 40-second on-air apology. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Nora Bennett reposted her original video with a new caption, The Full Truth, 6 minutes. No cuts, no lies. Within 24 hours, it had 12 million views, and the comments were a wall of support. Ethan Callahan is every person who ever got disrespected at work and had to swallow it. A hashtag started trending Stand Up Like Ethan, and it stayed at the top for 3 straight days. At Sterling Academy, the fallout was fast. Frank Whitaker called an emergency board meeting, and this time he ran it. He stood at the head of the table, arms folded, and spoke for less than 2 minutes. We took money to stay quiet. That ends today. The board voted unanimously. Brett Hollis was permanently expelled. A restraining order barred him from the property. Every dollar the Hollis family had ever donated, every mat, every plaque was returned or removed. Richard Hollis's advisory seat on the board was dissolved. His brass nameplate came off the locker room wall, and Diane Mercer carried it to the dumpster herself. The Academy put out a short public statement. No corporate language. Sterling Martial Arts Academy failed Ethan Callahan. We let money override the safety and dignity of a member of our staff. We owe him not just an apology, but action. The action came the next week. Frank Whitaker called Ethan into his office. The same office Ethan had mopped 100 times. Frank sat behind the desk. Ethan stood in the doorway, unsure whether to sit. Sit down, Ethan. He sat. I've known who you were for years, Frank said. I trained with men who trained with you. I knew you walked away from all of it because you thought your hands were a curse instead of a gift. He leaned forward. I should have found you sooner. I should have said something the day I hired you. That's on me. Ethan shook his head. You gave me a job when nobody else would. That was enough. It wasn't, Frank said, and we both know it. He slid a fold gi across the desk. White, clean, a black belt resting on top. I want you to teach here, not as a janitor, as a full instructor. Benefits. Your name on the schedule. He paused, and the first class is yours to design, whatever you want. Ethan looked at the gi for a long time. He didn't touch it right away. Then he said, I want to teach people like me, janitors, cleaners, night shift workers, kitchen staff, people who get looked right through every single day. He met Frank's eyes, not to make them fighters. To give them what nobody gave me, the right to stand up in a room without being afraid of what happens next. Frank nodded slowly. Then that's what we do. But there was one more piece to this story, and it's the piece most people never expect. Hack Brett Hollis. Brett didn't disappear. He didn't move away and hide. For a while, honestly, he did nothing but stew in it. He blamed everybody, his father, the judge, Ethan, the internet. He told himself he'd been set up, that the whole thing was a stunt, that none of it was his fault. But something had cracked open in him on that mat. In the second Ethan looked him in the eye, and Brett saw that calm, and understood for the first time in his life that all his trophies and all his father's money hadn't taught him the one thing that actually mattered. He didn't know what a real man looked like until one refused to hit him. His father wouldn't speak to him for a month, and in that silence Brett finally heard the truth. It wasn't Ethan who'd humiliated him. He'd done that himself, one cruel act at a time, and it had all been recorded, and he could never take a single second of it back. The court had ordered 12 weeks of anger management. Brett went, and then he kept going after the 12 weeks were up, all the way to 20, because somewhere in there he stopped going to check a box and started going because he needed it. He never made a public statement. He never posted about it. But 6 months after the hearing, a handwritten letter arrived at Sterling Academy. No return address. Diane Mercer recognized the handwriting. She brought it to Ethan. It was 3 sentences. I spent 3 weeks trying to make you feel like nothing, because that's how I felt every day of my life, and I thought if I could make somebody smaller than me, it would finally go away. It didn't. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about a lot of things, and I'm trying to fix it. Ethan read it, folded it, put it in his pocket. He never mentioned it again. Some wounds don't close with an apology, but some people deserve a little credit for finally trying. 6 months later, Sterling Martial Arts Academy looked different. The trophies were still in the window. Frank's banner still hung from the ceiling, but next to them was a new banner, plain black fabric, white letters. The Invisible Belt, founded by Ethan Callahan. Every Saturday morning, the main hall filled with people who'd never set foot in a dojo. Not athletes, not competitors, workers. The ones who clocked in before sunrise and clocked out after dark. The ones whose names nobody bothered to learn. Ethan taught them the way he'd been taught. Discipline first, technique second, respect always. He didn't promise them trophies. He promised them something harder to win, the ability to stand in a room and not feel invisible. The program started with 28 students. By the third month, there were over 100. 2 other academies in Colorado adopted the curriculum. Then one in Chicago reached out, then Houston, then Detroit. Ethan didn't charge a dime. A nonprofit called the Stand Tall Foundation formed to fund it, and Marcus Reed handled the paperwork for free. Diane Mercer got promoted to assistant director, and she wrote a new policy. Every complaint filed at Sterling would be reviewed by an independent panel, no exceptions. No donation could ever override the process again. She kept a printed copy on her desk next to a framed photo of Ethan's first class. And Frank Whitaker stepped back from the tournament circuit. Some afternoons after everyone left, the two of them trained together in the quiet 2 old soldiers moving through their forms, the way real fighters do when nobody's watching. But the moment that broke the internet, the moment that made grown adults cry in their living rooms, happened at the end of that very first class. Ethan had his phone propped up against the mirror, a video call, his mother watching from Rosewood Gardens. Her memory was fading more every week, but that morning her eyes were sharp. She watched her son teach. She watched a room full of strangers bow to him. And when the class ended, she pressed her hand against the screen. "That's my boy," she whispered, tears running her face. "That's my boy." Ethan turned to the phone. He smiled. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't hide. "So before you go, I want you to do something for me. Think about the Ethans in your life. The person who cleans your office after everyone's gone home. The woman who wipes down the machines at your gym. The man stocking the shelves at midnight when you run in for milk. You walk past them every day. Do you see them? Because here's the thing nobody tells you. The quietest person in the room is very often the strongest one in it. Respect costs you nothing. But looking straight through somebody, treating them like furniture, like a shadow that mops, that costs everything. Sometimes it costs a man 8 years of hiding what he is. And sometimes the people nobody notices are the ones carrying the heaviest weight of all. Ethan Callahan chose the mop because he was afraid of his own hands. It took a room full of people laughing at him to remind him what those hands were really for. Stand up for the invisible ones, because one day that might be you.